this is Dana and welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. Thank you for taking some of your time today to watch one of my orchid videos. This one is going to be an orchid medley chit chat where I simply pull a few random orchids from my collection and we talk through what's going on with them. I believe this will be Orchid Medley Chit Chat number 9. So if you would like to watch the first 8 medley videos, I will put a link in the upper right hand corner of the screen. Okay, so let's get started. Today's video has the backdrop of my bay window orchids. Most of them are Phalaenopsis and they're blooming right now, which makes this a gorgeous space. I do have some Dendrobiums and a few other varieties in the background. But the 4 orchids that I have pulled together for today's Orchid Medley Chit Chat are orchids that grow outside near the orchid hut during the growing season. Now this one, this Dendrobium, was outdoors for the winter, and it may have been a time or two inside the garage if the temperatures got really, really cold. The other 3 were under the grow lights in my secondary growing space for the winter, but at the end of March they were moved back outdoors to the orchid hut and have been there since. So we're going to start with this Dendrobium, which is Dendrobium Little Sweet Scent. And there's another orchid that I grow exactly the same way as this one. It's a white variety Anosmum. And this was my first winter season trying to do a proper winter's rest in an attempt to get this orchid as well as the Anosmum to bloom. And so, as you can see, that has not been completely successful. So let's talk through the winter rest that I did do. So last fall I stopped watering, and of course they had been well watered and well fed throughout the growing season, and this was a cane that grew last growing season. So I stopped watering in the fall, and these orchids had no water except for a light mist a time or two on a dry winter's day. For the entire winter season, they had brighter light, they had cooler temperatures for 8, 10, 12 weeks. And now that the weather has been warmer for a good month, maybe 5 or 6 weeks even, these orchids have not produced keikis along the bare canes, and they have not produced any indication that they intend to bloom. So what is happening is a new growth right here, and then underneath these canes right here there are a few little green sprouts which are just starting. And a rain shower actually got this orchid the other day, and it got wet for the first time since last fall. And so I've decided to just go ahead and start watering it and feeding it so that I can grow some, good canes this growing season. It's a possibility that this orchid just hasn't had enough time to adapt to my environment. It's possible maybe that these canes will bloom in the second season. I'm not quite sure. But, something did not go perfectly right here because this orchid should have bloomed and it just didn't. So next year, I'll have to consider whether or not I want to try anything a bit different for the winter's rest, or just do the same thing again and hope that maybe by then this orchid will be ready to bloom. So this one's a mystery, but so it goes sometimes with orchid growing. Okay, this next one is a success story. This is Tolumnia Firm Big Bang, and last year I repotted it in this decorative container. I'll put a link to that video in the upper right hand corner of the screen. Over the winter it was under the grow lights. It produced a lot of new roots over the winter, as well as continued to develop several new fans. And all of a sudden, it has 2 very, very long bloom spikes. They're growing just at a rapid pace. And then today, I noticed another bloom spike happening right here. So this is the third one. And I could swear that this bloom spike was not there 2 days ago. So they are really, really rapidly growing bloom spikes. But happy with how this one is doing. Okay, and then next up is actually a Better Grow bag baby from my local home improvement store. This one is Brassilia yellow bird, so it's an intergeneric hybrid. During the winter, it started developing this purple pigmentation, the anthocyanin, which is an indication that it is getting adequate light. I do believe that's needed for these types of orchids so that they bloom. And sure enough, here's a yellow bird bloom spike. So I'm really, really anxious for that to bloom. This will be the first time that it's blooming in my care. Although when I look at the plant carefully, I think I do see indication that maybe it has bloomed once or twice before. But this will be a first time bloomer for me. So happy with how that one is progressing. And then finally, my Fred Clark After Dark Catasetum-type orchid. I repotted this one a while back. I'll put a link to that video in the upper right hand corner of the screen. When I repotted it, this new growth was just a tiny, tiny little bud at the base of this newest bulb from the previous year. And it has been kept bone dry up until about 10 days ago. And 10 days ago, I noticed that this bulb was really, really beginning to get shriveled and desiccated. So I decided to go ahead and introduce some water. I had hoped that maybe I would see some roots down in this reservoir before I started watering, but because this was beginning to really, really shrivel, I decided to introduce water a little bit early. I started with 2 or 3 days of just having some water down in the bottom of this reservoir by filling up the holes and letting condensation sort of build up inside the pot because those roots were not used to any kind of moisture whatsoever. And then the last few days I have been trickling in some water along the edges, and I can tell that the roots are okay with the water because they are turning green as a reaction to that moisture in the pot. So, you know, the hazard with these is always that you may water them too soon and kill off the root tips, which, you know, you don't want that to happen. But I think both the new growth and the roots were far enough along that they were willing to accept that moisture in the pot. So now it's just a matter of continuing to watch the moisture, introducing some feed in the next few days because these orchids are both thirsty and heavy feeders. So this is new for me this year, so I'm kind of finding my way along as I go here, but really happy with the progress of this one so far. Okay, so that concludes my 4 orchids for today's Orchid Medley Chit Chat. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. In the upper right hand corner of the screen, I will be putting a link to the other Orchid Medley Chit Chats if you enjoyed the format of this one. And thanks so much for watching. Talk to you next time.